The air was thick with the scent of pine and defiance. Why would a woman I'd never met call the police to stop me from stepping foot on my own land? The moving truck rumbled behind me, its engine a low growl as I stood at the edge of my property, a small cabin nestled in the Montana woods. My name is Elias Kane, a retired Marine, and all I wanted was a quiet life after years of chaos. But Karen Whitaker, the HOA president, had other plans. Her voice had crackled over the phone to 911, shrill and certain, claiming I was a trespasser, a threat to her pristine community of Pine Hollow. The sheriff's cruiser pulled up, lights flashing, and 2 deputies stepped out, their boots crunching on the gravel. Karen stood on her porch across the road, arms crossed, her lips a tight line of triumph. I gripped the deed to my cabin, the paper worn but undeniable, and braced for a fight. This wasn't just about a cabin. It was about my right to belong. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the dirt road that wound through Pine Hollow. My cabin, a modest wooden structure with a sagging porch, stood at the edge of the community, surrounded by towering pines. I'd bought it sight unseen, a steal at auction, dreaming of solitude after 2 decades in the Corps. The moving truck driver, a wiry man named Hank, leaned against the hood, watching the scene unfold with a cigarette dangling from his lips. "You sure this is your place, buddy?" he asked, squinting at the deputies. I nodded, my jaw tight. The deed in my hand was my anchor, proof that this patch of earth was mine. But Karen's call had turned my arrival into a spectacle. Neighbors peeked from windows, their curtains twitching like nervous eyelids. The deputies, a young woman named Deputy Alvarez and an older man, Deputy Brooks, approached me cautiously, hands resting near their holsters. "Sir, we got a call about a trespasser," Alvarez said, her voice calm but firm. "Mind explaining what you're doing here?" I held up the deed, my voice steady despite the pulse hammering in my temples. "This is my property. Bought last month. I'm moving in." Brooks took the paper, his eyes scanning it while Karen stormed over, her heels clicking like gunfire. "That's nonsense," she snapped, her blonde bob quivering with indignation. "This cabin's been abandoned for years. It's an eyesore, and you don't belong here." Her words stung, but I'd faced worse than a suburban dictator in a pantsuit. I'd seen battlefields, lost friends, and carried scars that ran deeper than her petty complaints. Still, her accusation that I didn't belong hit a nerve. I'd spent my life fighting for a country that sometimes looked at my weathered face and saw a stranger. Deputy Alvarez glanced at the deed, then at Karen. "Ma'am, this looks legitimate. We'll need to verify," but Karen cut her off. "Verify? He's probably forged it. I'm protecting this community." Her voice rose, and I caught a flicker of doubt in Brooks' eyes. This wasn't going to be simple. The tension hung like smoke, curling around us as the neighbors' whispers grew louder. Karen's house, a pristine 2-story with manicured roses, stood in stark contrast to my cabin's peeling paint. She'd built her kingdom on control, and I was a crack in her perfect facade. I could feel the weight of her stare, her conviction that I was an intruder in her world. But this wasn't her world. It was mine, too. I'd earned it, not just with money, but with years of sacrifice. "Check the records," I told the deputies, my voice low but unyielding. "You'll see my name." Brooks nodded, heading back to the cruiser to radio in, while Alvarez stayed, her eyes flicking between me and Karen. Hank, the truck driver, flicked his cigarette into the dirt and muttered, "This lady's got some nerve." I almost smiled, but the stakes were too high. If the deputies sided with Karen, I'd be hauled off before I could even unpack. As Brooks spoke into his radio, Karen launched into a tirade about property values and community standards. "Pine Hollow isn't for people like him," she said, her words sharp enough to cut. I wonder what she meant by people like me. A veteran? A loner? Or something else she decided without knowing me. My hands clenched, but I kept my cool. I learned long ago that anger without strategy was a losing game. Alvarez stepped closer, her voice softer now. "Mr. Kane, why don't you tell us your side?" I took a breath, the forest air grounding me. I served 20 years in the Marines. Bought this place to start over. I'm not here to cause trouble, just to live. Her eyes softened, but Karen scoffed. A likely story. He's probably squatting. The accusation was a slap, but before I could respond, Brooks returned, his face unreadable. Record check out, he said. Elias Kane owns this property. Karen's face froze, her victory crumbling. But she wasn't done. Not yet. Karen's eyes narrowed, her lips parting as if she could will the deputies to change their minds. The deed was ironclad, but she wasn't the type to back down. She pointed a manicured finger at me, her voice dripping with venom. This isn't over. You think you can just waltz in here and ruin our community? I held her gaze, my years of facing down enemies steadying me. I'm not ruining anything. I'm just trying to live. The deputies exchanged a glance, and Alvarez stepped between us, her presence a quiet command. Ma'am, if the property's his, there's nothing we can do. Karen's face flushed red, but before she could argue, a new voice cut through the tension. What's going on here? A man, maybe in his 60s, limped toward us from a nearby house, his flannel shirt tucked into worn jeans. His name was Tom. I'd later learn a retired mechanic who'd lived in Pine Hollow for decades. His arrival shifted the air like a breeze before a storm. Tom's eyes flicked from Karen to me, then to the deputies. Karen, you stirring up trouble again? He asked, his voice gruff but warm. Karen bristled. This man's a trespasser, Tom. He's bringing down the neighborhood. Tom raised an eyebrow, looking at my cabin. That old place? Been empty since my buddy Jim passed. Good to see someone's finally fixing it up. His words were a lifeline, but Karen wasn't having it. Fixing it up? It's a dump, and he's not one of us. Tom chuckled, shaking his head. One of us? Karen, you moved here 5 years ago. Elias here's got as much right as you. I felt a spark of gratitude, but the twist came when Tom added, besides, I heard he's a Marine. You really want to mess with that? Karen froze, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in her eyes. My service wasn't something I flaunted, but it carried weight, and Tom knew it. The deputies, sensing the shift, began to wrap things up. Brooks handed me back the deed. Looks like you're clear, Mr. Kane. Welcome to Pine Hollow. His tone was neutral, but there was a flicker of respect in his eyes. Alvarez nodded, then turned to Karen. Ma'am, false reports waste our time. Let's not do this again. Karen's mouth opened, then closed, her outrage deflating like a punctured tire. But I knew this wasn't the end. She stormed back to her house, her heels stabbing the ground with every step. Hank, the truck driver, clapped me on the shoulder. You got guts, man. Need help unloading. I nodded, grateful for the distraction. As we started hauling boxes into the cabin, Tom lingered, his eyes thoughtful. Watch out for her, he warned. Karen's got a knack for making life hell. I thanked him, but my mind was already racing. This wasn't just about a cabin anymore. It was about standing my ground. Inside, the cabin smelled of dust and old wood. The floors creaked under my boots, and the windows were clouded with grime. It wasn't much, but it was mine. As Hank and I carried in my few belongings, a duffel bag, a folding chair, a box of books, the weight of the day settled on me. I'd faced insurgents and IEDs, but Karen's hostility felt personal in a way combat never did. She didn't just want me gone. She wanted me erased. I wondered what drove her, fear, control, or something deeper. As night fell, the forest outside grew quiet, the only sound the rustle of leaves. I sat on the porch, a lukewarm beer in hand, staring at the stars. They reminded me of nights in the desert, when the sky was the only thing that felt free. But freedom, I was learning, came with a fight. The next morning, I woke to a notice taped to my door. It was from the HOA signed by Karen, listing violations, unapproved exterior paint, overgrown weeds, and unauthorized residency. I laughed, bitter and sharp. Unauthorized residency? The deed was in my name, but Karen was playing a different game. She wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting the idea of me. I tore the notice down and headed to the community center, where the HOA held its monthly meetings. If Karen wanted a war, I'd bring one to her doorstep. The center was a squat building with too many windows, filled with folding chairs and the smell of stale coffee. A dozen residents sat scattered, whispering as I walked in. Karen stood at the front, her smile tight as she spotted me. "Mr. Kane," she said, her voice syrupy with false warmth. "So glad you could join us." I didn't smile back. This was her battlefield, but I'd been trained for worse. The community center buzzed with tension, the air heavy with the scent of cheap air freshener and unspoken grudges. Karen stood at the podium, her hands gripping the edges like a captain steering through a storm. I took a seat in the back, my eyes locked on her, feeling the weight of every stare in the room. The residents of Pine Hollow were a mix, some curious, some hostile, others just tired. I was the outsider, the man who dared to challenge their queen. Karen's voice cut through the murmurs, crisp and commanding. "We're here to discuss community standards," she began, her eyes flicking to me, "and the importance of maintaining Pine Hollow's reputation." The word reputation hung like a blade, and I knew it was aimed at me. My cabin, my presence, my very existence was a threat to her carefully curated world. She launched into a speech about property values, citing rules I'd never seen in any contract. "Certain individuals," she said, her gaze piercing, "think they can ignore our bylaws." The room shifted, eyes darting my way. I stood, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not ignoring anything. I own my property, and I'm here to stay." A murmur rippled through the crowd, some nodding, others frowning. Karen's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened. "Ownership doesn't exempt you from rules, Mr. Kane. Your cabin's an eyesore, and we have standards." Before I could respond, Tom, the retired mechanic, stood up. "Karen, you've been hounding folks about standards since you got here. Maybe let the man settle in before you bury him in fines." The room erupted in whispers, and I felt a spark of hope. Not everyone was under a thumb. But then came the twist. A woman in her 40s, with nervous hands and a quivering voice, stood up. "I saw him," she said, pointing at me. "Last night, near my house, sneaking around with a flashlight. What was he doing?" The accusation hit like a sucker punch. I hadn't been near anyone's house. I'd been on my porch, fixing a loose board with a headlamp. But the room turned on me, faces clouding with suspicion. Karen seized the moment, her voice dripping with concern. "This is exactly why we need vigilance. We don't know who this man is or what he's capable of." My blood boiled, but I kept my composure. "I was working on my porch," I said, meeting the woman's eyes. "You must have seen my headlamp. I'm not sneaking anywhere." She faltered, but Karen pressed on. "We'll investigate this, Mr. Kane. And if you're lying, there'll be consequences." The meeting ended in a haze of accusations and half-hearted promises to look into my deed. I left the center, my chest tight with anger and something deeper, humiliation. I'd faced enemies overseas, but this was different. These were my neighbors, and they saw me as a threat. Back at the cabin, I found another notice on my door, this one demanding I attend a formal HOA hearing. Karen was escalating, turning a personal vendetta into a public trial. I spent the evening poring over the HOA bylaws, a dense packet of rules that seemed designed to trap rather than protect. Every page screamed control, and I realized Karen wasn't just fighting me. She was fighting anyone who didn't fit her vision of Pine Hollow. But I wasn't alone. Tom stopped by, his limp more pronounced in the evening chill. "Don't let her get to you," he said, handing me a coffee. "She's been like this since she took over the HOA, bullies anyone who doesn't bow." His words stayed with me as I sat on my porch, the forest whispering around me. I thought of my years in the Corps, the missions that tested my limits, the men and women who'd fought beside me. They'd trusted me with their lives, and I'd never let them down. Karen's game was different, but it was still a fight, and I wasn't backing down. The next morning, I started fixing up the cabin, painting the exterior, pulling weeds, anything to show I wasn't running. Neighbors drove by, some waving, others staring. I didn't care. This was my home, and I'd make it mine, one nail at a time. But as I worked, I couldn't shake the woman's accusation from a meeting. Why had she lied? Or had she really seen something? The doubt gnawed at me, a seed of unease that Karen would surely water. The days blurred into a rhythm of defiance and labor. I painted the cabin a deep forest green, the kind that blended with the pines rather than fought them. The weeds were gone, replaced by a small garden bed I'd started, a nod to the life I wanted to build. But Karen's shadow loomed. The HOA hearing was set for the end of the week, and notices kept appearing on my door, each one more absurd than the last. One cited excessive noise from my hammer, another claimed my truck was parked improperly. I ignored them, but the pressure was mounting. Pine Hollow was a battlefield now, and Karen was amassing her troops. Neighbors who'd once nodded politely now avoided my eyes, and I heard whispers of troublemaker as I walked to the mailbox. But not everyone turned. Tom and a few others, Sarah, a nurse who lived down the road, and Javier, a carpenter, started dropping by, offering tools or a kind word. They were outliers, but they were enough to keep me grounded. The night before the hearing, I found a letter slipped under my door. It wasn't from the HOA, the handwriting was shaky, and the note wasn't signed. I'm sorry about the meeting. I was wrong. Check your backyard. My pulse quickened. The woman from the meeting, her name was Lisa, I'd learned, must have written it. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the backyard, the beam cutting through the dark. At the edge of the property, near a cluster of pines, I found it. A small pile of trash, beer cans and wrappers, deliberately placed to look like I'd dumped them. Someone was setting me up. My mind raced to Karen, but I had no proof. I bagged the trash and tossed it in my bin, my anger simmering. This wasn't just about control anymore. It was personal. Lisa's note was a crack in Karen's armor, but I needed more than an apology to win. The hearing was held in the community center, the same room now packed with residents. Karen stood at the front, her smile a mask of authority. I sat near the back, my deed and bylaws in hand, ready to fight. She called the meeting to order, her voice dripping with false concern. We're here to address violations by Elias Kane, whose actions threaten our community's harmony. She listed my supposed crimes: unapproved paint, unauthorized residency, even the trash in my backyard. The room murmured, and I felt the weight of their judgment. But then Lisa stood, her hands trembling. I need to say something, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The room fell silent. I lied about seeing Elias sneaking around. Karen told me to say it. She said it was for the good of Pine Hollow. The air shifted, shock rippling through the crowd. Karen's face paled, but she recovered quickly. That's absurd. Lisa, you're confused. Lisa held her ground, her voice growing stronger. No, I'm not. You gave me those cans to plant in his yard. You wanted him gone. The room erupted, voices overlapping in anger and disbelief. I stood, my heart pounding. I have the deed. I followed every rule I could find. This isn't about violations. It's about someone who can't stand losing control. Karen's eyes locked on mine, and for a moment, I saw fear. But she wasn't done. She banged the gavel, shouting over the chaos. This is a setup. He's turned you all against me. The accusation was desperate, and it backfired. Tom stood, his voice booming. Karen, you've been running this place like a dictator. Maybe it's time we vote on new leadership. The crowd roared in agreement, and I saw Karen's empire begin to crack. The hearing dissolved into chaos, residents shouting over each other as Karen tried to regain control. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The truth was out, and it was spreading like wildfire. As I left the center, Javier clapped me on the shoulder. You shook things up, man. About time. I nodded, but my mind was on Karen. She'd lost this round, but I knew she wouldn't go quietly. Back at the cabin, I found another note, this one in Karen's precise handwriting. You'll regret this. The words sent a chill down my spine, but I wasn't afraid. I'd faced worse than her, and I'd won. The cabin felt more like home now, its walls holding the promise of a fight I was ready to finish. The fallout from the hearing was immediate. Karen's grip on Pine Hollow began to slip, but she clung to power like a drowning woman to a raft. Notices stopped appearing on my door, but the whispers didn't. Some residents saw me as a hero, others as a troublemaker who'd upset their quiet lives. I didn't care about their labels. I cared about my home. I kept working on the cabin, replacing rotted boards and fixing the leaky roof. Sarah, the nurse, brought me a tray of cookies one evening, her smile warm but cautious. "You've got people talking," she said. "Some good, some bad. Just keep your head down." I thanked her, but keeping my head down wasn't my style. I'd learned in the Corps that battles were won by facing the enemy, not hiding from them. Karen's next move came quietly, like a snake in the grass. A petition circulated demanding my eviction for disrupting community harmony. It had a dozen signatures, but I recognized only a few names: Karen's loyalists, people who'd nodded along at her meetings. Tom got wind of it and showed up at my door, his face grim. "She's rallying her cronies," he said. "They're planning to present it at the next meeting." I felt a surge of anger, but also clarity. Karen wasn't fighting for Pine Hollow. She was fighting for herself. Her control was slipping, and she was desperate to pin the blame on me. I spent the next few days gathering my own allies. Javier offered to speak at the meeting, and Lisa, still shaken by her role in Karen's scheme, promised to back me up. The tide was turning, but I knew the final battle was coming. The second meeting was even more packed than the first. The community center felt like a powder keg, every whisper and glance charged with tension. Karen stood at the podium, her petition in hand, her voice steady but cold. "Elias Kane has caused nothing but discord," she said, holding up the signatures like a trophy. "We deserve a community free of troublemakers." The room was divided. Some clapped, others muttered in dissent. I stood, my voice cutting through the noise. "I've done nothing but try to live here. You've lied, manipulated, and tried to frame me. If anyone's disrupting this community, it's you." The crowd gasped, and Karen's face twisted with rage. Before she could respond, Lisa stood, her voice clear. "He's right. Karen pressured me to lie about him. She's been bullying people for years." Javier followed, recounting how Karen had fined him for a fence that met every code. One by one, others spoke up, stories of unfair fines, threats, and intimidation. Karen's empire was crumbling, and she knew it. She tried to fight back, her voice rising to a shriek. "This is a conspiracy. You're all turning on me." But the room wasn't hers anymore. Tom called for a vote to remove her as HOA president, and the hands shot up, more than I'd expected. Karen's face went white, her hands trembling as she gripped the podium. "You can't do this," she screamed, but the vote was final. She was out. The room erupted in cheers and arguments, but I felt a strange calm. I hadn't come to Pine Hollow to start a revolution, but I'd exposed a tyrant. As the meeting ended, Karen stormed out, her heels echoing like a retreating army. I knew she wasn't gone for good. She'd find a way to lash out. But for now, Pine Hollow was free, and I played a part in that. Back at the cabin, I found a small crowd waiting: Tom, Sarah, Javier, and even Lisa. They'd brought beer and chairs, turning my porch into an impromptu gathering. "To new beginnings," Tom said, raising a bottle. I clinked mine against his, feeling the weight of the past week's lift. The cabin wasn't just a house anymore. It was a symbol of what I'd fought for. But as we laughed and talked, I couldn't shake the feeling that Karen's final move was still out there, waiting in the shadows. The weeks after Karen's ousting were quieter, but the calm felt uneasy, like the hush before a storm. Pine Hollow was changing. Neighbors smiled more, stopped by to chat, even helped with the cabin. Javier lent me his tools, and Sarah brought her kids over to plant flowers in my garden bed. The HOA elected Tom as interim president, and his first act was to shred Karen's petty notices. But I wasn't naive. Karen hadn't been seen at the community center, and her house was eerily quiet, the roses wilting in her yard. I knew she was planning something, and I wasn't about to let my guard down. I'd learned in the Corps to trust my instincts, and they were screaming that this wasn't over. One night, as I sat on my porch, a flicker of light caught my eye. It came from the woods behind my cabin, faint but deliberate, like a flashlight moving through the trees. My pulse quickened, memories of night patrols flooding back. I grabbed my own flashlight and stepped into the dark, my boots silent on the pine needles. The air was cold, the forest alive with whispers of wind. I followed the light, my senses sharp, until I found it. A tripwire stretched across a path, barely visible. It was crude but effective, rigged to a small alarm hidden in the brush. Someone was watching me. My mind went to Karen, but I had no proof. I dismantled the wire, my hand steady despite the adrenaline. This was no game. She was escalating, and I needed to be ready. The next morning, I told Tom and Javier about the tripwire. Tom's face darkened. "She's unhinged," he said. "Lost her power. Now she's desperate." Javier suggested we check her property, but I shook my head. "We need evidence, not accusations. She'll twist it against us." Instead, I set up a cheap security camera, hidden in the eaves of my cabin. If Karen was sneaking around, I'd catch her. Days passed, and the camera caught nothing but deer and raccoons. But then, late one night, it recorded her, Karen, creeping through my backyard, a can of spray paint in hand. She scrawled "trespasser" across my shed, her face twisted with rage. My blood boiled, but I had her now. I saved the footage and called Deputy Alvarez. The deputies arrived the next morning, their cruiser pulling up just as Karen stepped onto her porch, her face a mask of innocence. I showed Alvarez the footage, and her jaw tightened. "That's vandalism, Mr. Kane. We'll handle it." They crossed the road to Karen's house, and I watched from my porch as she tried to talk her way out. Her voice rose, shrill and panicked, but Alvarez wasn't buying it. They escorted her to the cruiser, her hands cuffed, her empire reduced to a single, desperate act. Neighbors gathered, whispering, as the cruiser drove away. I felt no triumph, only relief. Karen's reign was over, and Pine Hollow could breathe again. That evening, Tom and Sarah came by, their faces a mix of disbelief and gratitude. "You did it," Sarah said, her voice soft. "You stood up to her, and now we're free." I shook my head. "We did it. All of us." The cabin glowed under the setting sun, its green paint fresh and proud. I'd fought for this place, not just against Karen, but against the doubt that I didn't belong. Pine Hollow wasn't perfect, but it was home, and I'd earned my place in it. The cabin became my sanctuary, its walls a testament to resilience. I finished the repairs, added a new porch swing, and planted a row of pines to shield me from the road. Pine Hollow settled into a new rhythm, one without Karen's shadow. She'd moved away after the vandalism charge. Her house sold to a young couple who waved every morning. The HOA, under Tom's leadership, focused on community, potlucks, clean-up days, even a book club Sarah started. I joined, though I mostly listened, my copy of Steinbeck dog-eared, but well-loved. The neighbors who'd once avoided me now stopped by, sharing stories over coffee or beer. Lisa apologized again, her eyes bright with relief. "I was scared," she said, "but you showed me how to stand up." I nodded, understanding more than I could say. Fear could twist anyone, but courage could rebuild. One evening, as I sat on the swing, Deputy Alvarez stopped by, off-duty in jeans and a flannel. "Thought you'd want to know," she said, leaning against the railing. "Karen's gone for good. Pleaded guilty, got probation, and left town." I thanked her, but my mind was on the bigger victory. Pine Hollow wasn't just a place anymore. It was a community, one I'd helped shape. Alvarez lingered, her eyes on the stars. "You're a hell of a fighter, Elias. The Corps taught you well." I smiled, the first real one in weeks. "Some fights are worth it." She nodded, then headed back to her truck, leaving me with the quiet of the forest and the weight of a hard-won peace. Life in the cabin wasn't perfect, but it was mine. I'd wake to the sound of birds, work on small projects, and sit on the porch at night, the stars a reminder of battles past and present. I'd come to Pine Hollow seeking solitude, but I'd found something better, connection. Not the kind that demanded conformity, but the kind that grew from standing your ground and lifting others with you. I thought of my old squad, the men and women who'd had my back. Pine Hollow was my new squad, flawed but fierce, and I was proud to be part of it. As the seasons turned, the cabin stood strong, a symbol of what I'd fought for. Not just a place, but a life worth living. And every night, as I locked the door, I felt the truth settle in my bones. I belonged here. End.